move on to the second academic engagement for this afternoon. Professor Suresh Canagarajah's lecture on the book Post-colonial English Language Curriculum Practices in South Asia, Building Confidence to Speak English. Before which, I cordially invite Dr. Shashini Tenabatu, Head of the Department of English Language Teaching, University of Colombo, once again to formally introduce Professor Canagarajah.
Professor Suresh Canagarajah is the Edwin Erle Professor of Applied Linguistics, English and Asian Studies at Pennsylvania State University, where he has been a member of the faculty since 2007. His research covers world Englishes and teaching English to speakers of other languages. He is known for his work on translingualism, translanguaging, linguistic imperialism, and social and political issues in language education. Some of his recent achievements are, in 2016, he was named as one of the top 50 scholars who has shaped the field of TESOL or TESOL by TESOL International and honored in its 50th anniversary celebrations in the annual convention held in 2016 in Baltimore. He was selected as the recipient of the Distinguished Scholarship and Service Award by the American Association of Applied Linguistics for 2018, which was awarded in 2018 itself in Chicago. In 2016, Professor Canagarajah was selected based on a very competitive international nominations as the S.T. Lee Visiting Fellow by the School of Advanced Studies, University of London. In 2016, he obtained the inaugural Best Book Award from the American Association of Applied Linguistics for Translingual Practice, Global Englishes and Cosmopolitan Relations, which was published in 2013. In 2015, Professor Canagarajah obtained the Best Article Award from the Journal of Second Language Writing for the article titled Blessed in My Own Way, Pedagogical Affordances for Dialogical Voice Construction in Multilingual Student Writing. That is just a brief outline of the recent achievements he has got. And I'm sure he has quite a number of achievements and awards under his belt for the number of years he has been working and doing research in this area. Now I would like to invite Professor Canagarajah to deliver his lecture. Professor, over to you.
I'll stand over here if you don't mind. I'm kind of hidden behind the flowers. You might mistake me for a flower, so let me stand here. First of all, let me congratulate Asantha for bringing out this book. When I was teaching in Sri Lanka after 1994, I remember that there was no or very little incentive to do research and publish. It might have changed now, but some years back, the department I was in didn't encourage me to publish or have resources such as grant money to do field work. So Asantha in introduction, in her preface, explains the lengths to which she had to go in order to do this research in her own money, and also the time she had to find in order to write because of her motivation. So I want to encourage that, and I hope a lot of other scholars in Sri Lanka talk about their experiences. Even in the case of a research that is not formally obtained, with data that is formally obtained, a lot of teachers are these days talking about their personal experiences in narrative as a form of research. So I think we have opportunities to publish in a low budget research where you don't need a lot of money a lot of time in order to talk about your experiences. The issue is not whether you agree totally with what the author says or not, but have a document that records somebody's experiences, which you can take forward in your own research, which you can use for conversations related to teaching in our own context. So I value scholars who talk about their experiences in the form of a publication. Till it appears in print, it's not available for others. It's a good thought you might have in your head, and also talk to one or two colleagues, but it's good to have a document, a text that we can use for this purpose. So I want to congratulate Asantha for bringing out this book. Before I go further, let me say that I've always found it difficult to practice the genre of felicitations, that is felicitating a book, felicitating an author, and whenever I did this in the University of Jaffna, I was told that I was violating the genre. The reason is that I was probably expected to do like 100% flattery, and I was kind of doing 20% of taking the conversation forward, to put it mildly. So I hope my comments are not construed as violating the genre of felicitations, but this is how I explained to my colleagues about what I was trying to do. A good publication motivates you to think further along those lines. A good publication ignites your thinking in order to broaden the conversation, broaden the significance and implications, to do your own research and not just start with the book. So I hope you would understand my comments from that point of view. So I'm going to do three things. First, I'll broaden the context in order to frame this book. Where do we situate this book? And it will be a slightly different context from the doctor's framing, because Asantha did a great thing in having two people from two different fields share about their observations. So I'll broaden the context in one way. Certainly, I will talk about the significance of this book in the context of this broader framing. And finally, I'll try to take forward this conversation to say there are debates about how we should think about anxiety in communication. There are debates about post-coloniality, and are there other ways to do this research about English language in the post-colonial world? Okay, the context. The context for me is Professor Thirukandeya's article in Navasiru in 1972 with the term Kaduva, if you can remember. And it was a very short article, about 2 or 3 pages, starting with something very practical, narrative, what students in Peradeniya were saying about the use of English when somebody tries to engage them in a conversation in English on campus. And what they said was, English is like Kaduva. It's making us uncomfortable. It's cutting us down. It's making us feel embarrassed. And there were some anxieties, fears associated to somebody accosting them in English. I found as I went further, while I was doing research in Sri Lanka after my PhD in the early 1990s, a lot of students would come to our class to learn grammar, but stay away from the class when we tried to have a communicative activity where they had to use English among themselves. And it seemed as if they were uncomfortable using English for a real life communication, but they wanted to distance themselves from English and say, I'll learn the grammar, or I can learn the literate activity of writing, reading, and passing the exam, but I don't want to use the language for conversations. Fast forward to about a year ago, a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, Indika Liyanage, and myself, we published an article in Kisol Quarterly. Asantha talked about all these things while I was coming on the plane, so I don't have all my references handy. But if you have a conversation over tea, I might remember more details. But in order to write this article, we did a thorough research on who has talked about the anxiety of using English in post-colonial countries in the TESOL applied linguistics literature. And what we found was there are bits and pieces of anecdotes by a lot of scholars from Malaysia, Indonesia, and other post-colonial countries, about a similar kind of experiences. In each country, they have their own word, like kaduwa in our case, in a Malay or a language in another country, about how uncomfortable they were with somebody who would spring up English to make them feel uncomfortable. But nothing substantial, no longer work. So I'll spring in here the first significance of this book. This is the first book-length treatment of this anxiety, discomfort of using English with people from people in the third world in conversations among themselves. It's a key qualification, among themselves. We'll come to that in a minute. They don't feel anxious using English with Adam, for example. And Asantha talks about it. When Adam does an interview with people in all 4 countries she visited, they were not uncomfortable with using English with him, but they were uncomfortable using English among themselves. But before I go further into Asantha's book, let me briefly describe what we found out in terms of, once again, broadening the conversation. We took a slightly different approach with what we were finding. A few things about Attanayake. He's from Sri Lanka. He did his PhD in India, also in New Delhi. He's now teaching in Australia in Deakin University. While he was doing this research, he was in Griffith University. Fortunately, because he's in Australia, he found the money to come to Penn State as a visiting scholar, not once, but about 3 times, to talk about his research, to listen to other seminars and conferences for his professional development. And one of the things among the different types of data he had, one of them was about his teaching experience in a small island of Australia called Kiribati. It's spelled differently, Kiribati. You and I will say Kiribati, which is what I did. And he said, no, the local people call it Kiribati. It's a Polynesian island. And he was sent by Griffith University for teacher development. And one of the things he found was, when you have some workshops, activities for local teachers to speak in English, they would resist. They would feel shy. They'll talk in Kiribati and produce the answer in English for the plenary report. Or outside in society, when people talk to each other, they would say if somebody of their own clan, of their own community speaks English to them, they call it shaming. The word shaming is slightly different from how the British would use it. We all have our own ways of using these words in Sri Lanka. So shaming basically means embarrassing. Somebody is shaming me with the use of English. Or it is shaming to use English in Kiribati, which means it's an embarrassing experience. So there are a lot of Western, Australian, American, UK aid workers who are also bringing a lot of money into Kiribati in order to improve their English, which they think the local people need for their own development and globalization, and the local people are not using English. So Indika interviewed both groups of people. The local people said the things that I told you earlier, that this is shaming. And the development workers were saying, these guys are so backward. They don't want to move forward. They are holding themselves back. They are not motivated. They are lazy. They are scared. So you can see a conflict here in terms of how this is perceived. So what we came up with is to say, in the context of what was going on in Kiribati, we said, we don't want to pathologize this discomfort. It could be a strategy of resistance to say, English up to this point, not beyond this point. So I have to tell you that they were happy to use English with non-Kiribati people. So their economy is built around shipping. There are sailors also involved in the fishing industry, and they have to work with a lot of foreigners, not necessarily British or American, but also maybe Chinese, Filipino, etc. They would use English. But there were 1 or 2 rare, unusual, unlucky individuals who thought after they finished their 6-month work on a ship, they could continue to use English in their own community. It's unfortunate because they were ostracized, they were shamed. So what they were saying was, it's okay to use English for contact purposes with a lot of people from other communities, but just don't bring it here because we have a different ethic of communication among our within the community. So our approach there in that article, just to give you a different perspective, is each context is different, cultures are different, countries are different, and you are the authorities on what you like to do here. But in terms of Kiribati trying to listen carefully to what they were saying, we said, let's not think of English as an all-purpose language for this community. They don't have to do all the things their Kiribati language does equally well in English. They want English for a particular purpose, as a functional language, for context situations, not for everyday use with their own people, for which they're a rich language. They didn't necessarily have to be English for that purpose. So our approach was to say, we call it a pedagogy of code switching, not code switching in the sociolinguistic sense, but as a metaphor for using one language in one place and another language in another place. So in this case, English had certain functional purposes for which the Kiribati were happy to learn it, but there were others, community and in-group communication purposes for which they wanted their own language. So that's the story of that research. So to move from there to Asantha's book, a couple of things that are significant, as I already told you, this is the first book on that subject. Ours also was just an article, and while we were doing a literature review, we found that there are a lot of other articles that make a passing mention of what they were seeing in their country, but they didn't really study it fully. So I'm sure this book will generate a lot of conversation about why do local people feel uncomfortable using English among themselves? Why do students feel uncomfortable when they use English among themselves? Secondly, I think Asantha introduces a new term for good reasons. The people who have done this research in language anxiety, the well-known scholar is Elaine Horowitz, who was actually my mentor in University of Texas at Austin, where I was doing my PhD, and she's now retired, but she's the best-known person for this research. She coined the term foreign language classroom anxiety, FLAC, and Asantha makes a case for finding a different label, language attitude anxiety, and the reason, as you can see from the labels, is to move the conversation beyond the classroom to society in general. That is, this anxiety is not demonstrated only in the classroom by students. It draws from historical, geopolitical influences of how English was spread in a lot of countries. So I think in relation to this new terminology that she introduces, I think a third significance is that she moves the conversation from psycholinguistics to sociolinguistics. So Elaine Horowitz is a psycholinguistic scholar. She was looking at it from a cognitive and psychological point of view, and there's good reasons to do that, as the doctor has said. But we also need the sociolinguistic side of this conversation, which situates this anxiety in cultural influences, historical influences, geopolitical influences, if you want to talk about East versus West, Britain versus others. So it's an important shift in the conversation. So in relation to this shift she is making, let me also make a fourth and a fifth, which leads to the next point that I'm going to make. She also makes this, she conducts this conversation in relation to identity. She doesn't frame it as identity research, but the implications are completely there. So think about this. Some scholars would say we learn a language not because we want to master a grammar, but because we want to develop an identity. It's kind of shocking, right? We learn a language for identity, not because we want to pass the TOEFL test. It's common sense, but we don't talk about it that way. So the construct that Asantha introduces about language anxiety is something related to identity. The Kiribati people are thinking about English in a different way because it affects their notion of identity within the in-group. How a Kiribati person should present himself or herself to another Kiribati person is different from how, what English would do to their identity. So it's an important conversation we need to have about English in relation to identity. And maybe I would add one more to what I mentioned. With identity comes affect. That is, we have not really talked about feelings, emotions in relation to language learning. Because from a structuralist, modernist point of view, all the academic inquiry we did prioritized reason, cognition. So we talk about reason rather than feelings, cognition rather than the body. So what does English language do to my body? A simple example would be, when I was a graduate student in the United States, in an American classroom, I would use words like, the dance was interesting today, you have a master's degree. As soon as I came to my room with other Sri Lankans, I had to say, are you going for that dance? What's happening to your master's degree? If not, they'll slap me. Tell me, who do you think you are? You think you're Donald Trump or something? So it's an implication, my body doesn't let me talk the way some other body would talk about these things. So affect is an important consideration, and you can see behind this book, there are implications of feelings related to anxiety, fear, etc. So, and the final thing I want to say is this book, as the title implies, brings this conversation into post-colonial politics. Actually, it's a nice effect, that music to my talk. Makes you make me want to dance, I guess. Talks don't make you do that. Post-coloniality situates language learning in a very geopolitical, charged, ideological context. And we need to talk about language learning in that situation. Because in the past, we have always thought about language learning either in the context of just grammar or just teacher-student relationships, classroom relationships. But we need to broaden it to think about history, geopolitics, inequalities. So this book helps us do that. But here's where I want to just open up current debate that's going on about how we think about English in third world or underdeveloped communities which are formerly colonized. So I want to introduce three terms: post-colonial orientation, decolonial option, Southern theory. There's a debate among scholars of the formerly colonized nations about how to think about experiences in their country. In their countries. So post-coloniality, they would say, the critics would say, post-colonial scholars may not agree, but the critics would say, post-coloniality thinks about language, cultural, identity implications still in the framing of Western discourses. So if you think about scholars like Homi Bhabha, for example, a lot of other scholars who talk about hybridity, they are not saying move away from the Western identity or move away from English. They are saying move beyond that by taking all of them into account. Draw from English, draw from Western education, and see how you can merge your identities, your discourses into a hybrid. Third space is another term they would use, and it shows you the implication. Don't draw back, move forward by drawing from everything. The decolonial option is saying, stop thinking in terms of the Western framing of anything. Think more indigenously about what's the tradition, the culture, the context of your own community. So I'll give you a quick example. For us, in English language teaching, currently communicative language teaching is almost the norm, what's expected in language teaching. And this is a very Western thing. In the United States, they say, if you don't have a very active classroom, where people are talking, laughing, running around the room, there's no learning happening. They want a very hyperactive class. So you'll be doing a lot, like you'll play musical chairs in the classroom, not show your learning. But actually there was a research about this. There was an Australian scholar, two scholars, one was Edwin, who wrote an article about students from Japan, China, who are perceived as quiet, therefore not having an identity, not learning, because they're silent. So, but the good thing is these guys were again sociolinguists, ethnographers, they went and talked to them. And what they said is, we are not doing this because we are anxious about language, we are not doing this because we are tongue-tied, we are fearful, but we are silently thinking. Went on to say, these Anglo students are acting up. They're just talking for no reason. They don't want to do that. They found further, these students did start talking strategically over time when their contribution mattered. They're not talking all the time. In the United States, we give points for talking. We want you to talk. Everybody talk for no reason. Just talk because we want to show you're learning. But these Japanese students said, and that's not our understanding of good learning. So what I'm saying is, we can assume communicative language teaching as a norm and see how can we get our students to talk like that, talk all the time. But the indigenous scholars might say, there are traditions of learning in our countries for the decolonial option, which doesn't let us go the Western way, not let us accept the norms from the West as the ideal learning situation. So just to give you a kind of a example, just one initial example. Way back, before TESOL and applied linguistics were formulated as fields, disciplines in the modern academy, in our part of the world, 1,000 years before Christ, 2,000 years before Christ, did people learn languages? There was no field called TESOL. There was no field called applied linguistics. There was no PhD in Oxford. Did people learn languages? Much more than we do. They were heavily multilingual. How did they do that? We don't know. I'm not going to give you the answer. The reason is that in order to develop the decolonial point of view, you need a lot of archival research, which we don't have. In a lot of contexts, especially in the South America, we have a lot of stories about the Spanish in that case, who came and destroyed the texts of the indigenous communities because they said these people's ways of talking and writing are just superstitious, heathenish, illogical. We don't need them. So I'm sure a lot of similar things happened either deliberately or by disregard in our context, that we just didn't take note of all the histories, writings, traditions in our part of the world about how people learn to talk. But be assured, there was a lot of talking going on in multiple languages, even more diverse and multilingual than we are used to. There was something they had that we don't know. But I can just introduce you one concept, and this is called fragmented multilingualism. And what it means is, people use bits and pieces of language they need for their purposes, even though they might not have an advanced, complete mastery of the whole language. See that issue? So for example, out there on the street, if I pretend like I don't know a lot of Sinhala, a cab driver, trishaw driver might help me around in English. Just the words like 100 rupees smooth ride or something like that. That might be a little too fast, sure. 100 rupees, where are you going? He doesn't have any language anxiety. What's happening? Couple of things. First of all, he's comfortable with functionally using his words for his purposes. He knows the words he needs, he has those words. The second thing, a larger point we need to think about, he is not bothered about other people's norms. He's not bothered about the Queen's English. He's saying, there's another poor fellow Sri Lankan, I need to help this guy, he needs to go home, I'll use whatever I have for his purpose. So there's a lesson here for us to, unfortunately my title of the talk is to help you to overcome, to build confidence. So it looks like I'm not talking about it. So at least this much I can tell you, confidence depends on being confident about the words you have for your purposes in your own way, not in somebody else's way. But that you probably didn't come for that. You wanted to teach English the way you do. But that's something we can wrestle with as we go along, in the sense of, for example, not a lot of people are happy with fragmented multilingualism. That doesn't mean you know language. To know language means can you pass the test? How much of the language do you know? But a lot of people, so the fragmented multilingualism as a concept came out with a lot of European scholars who are dealing with a lot of multilingualism in their part of the world, in the European Union, for example. There are like French who are in Germany, Danish students who are studying for 6 months in Spain. And how do they get around? What they say is, They are functionally competent in the words they need for educational purpose. There are others who are teaching languages. If you have heard of the curriculum for plurilingualism, and the European Union's statement says it's about people using languages for different purposes with different proficiencies. They don't want all these students, so for example, they would teach history in German. History would be, German. Philosophy has to be in French. Derrida, Foucault, they wrote their original work in French. Technology might be in another language. So they're not assuming our students can do all the subjects in all the languages they say do it in the same way. So one of my colleagues, Ophelia Garcia from City University of New York, she uses this metaphor to explain this kind of competency. She says the traditional understanding of competence is like the wheels of a cycle, a bicycle. There is everything you can do in English, you have to do the same way in Spanish. Or everything you do in Tamil, you have to do the same way in Sinhala. What she says is, this is redundant. People don't have time for this. You don't have to do the same things you do in all the languages just because you need to pass the test. Her model of language proficiency is the Luna space model. It has like one hand that goes this way, another hand that goes that way, a third hand that goes that way to pick some rocks, fourth hand that goes another way to check the temperature. Can you see it's kind of very diversified? So those are the 5 languages that will do different things. So that might be, I'm just assuming, one of the things that people in our part of the world did 1,000 years before Christ in order to talk 5 different languages without going to school and having people trained with PhDs to teach them those languages. So the decolonial option is to think differently, not to assume the things we have learned in the West as the norm for how we should do language learning. Southern theory is basically a slightly different orientation, saying people of the South, who were all colonized at one point by Western Europe, have some shared experiences that might lead them to teach and learn differently. So the decolonial option is somewhat inward-looking at your own community in somewhat ethnographic, anthropological ways to dig into your past. But Southern theory actually also moves you beyond your community for solidarity with other Southern communities. So just to give you an example for language learning, the Southern theory is also interested in an epistemological shift. That is, they believe with colonization, we also got indoctrinated into Enlightenment ways of thinking in Europe. Some other people might use the word modernist ways of thinking. So in linguistics, for example, there are a few things that came with Enlightenment. One of them is language as a structure of its own. Don't depend on history or society or culture to explain language. So Mr. Ferdinand de Saussure, for example, a lot of people say he's the father of modern linguistics, and whatever he did for language spread into a lot of other fields. Sociology, political science, everybody believes we have an object of analysis that is autonomous, separated from other things like culture, society, history. You remember synchronic and diachronic, for example, in Linguistics 101, and he prioritized synchronic, system for its own sake. Diachronic is to situate it in history. So just to clarify that there was something unique about the linguistics that was brought to us by Europe. And what a lot of Southern theorists say, in our part of the world, just to give you one alternative, we also believed in embodiment. Language is part of, embedded in culture, identity, skin, body, history. So you cannot separate language and make it an autonomous system that can be studied for its own sake. You can't teach language just for grammar, disassociating it with people's bodies, feelings, emotions, etc. So if that's a kind of metaphor that might be shared by a lot of colonized people from Asia, Africa, South America, that might be something to explore further. What does embodiment say about using language, teaching language, learning language? So what I'm saying is that we can think about how to go beyond the problem that Asantha identifies in this book, our discomfort with using English among our own people. There are clear, she situates in the colonial experience, and that's definitely one of the experiences that accounts for our fear, discomfort. You know, as well as I do, sometimes we teach English literature in Sinhala and Tamil. It's because the students are our own students. We feel uncomfortable having a whole class in English. Definitely you code switch, and that's good, that's fine. There are important skills in moving from one language to the other when you talk about Shakespeare. So one of my colleagues in Penn State is a Chinese junior scholar, Xiao Yu, and the English department told me, teach a graduate course with him in order to mentor him. You know, he's a junior scholar, so we taught some courses together. And what I found was, in his book, an English literary book, a critical book, or even a text, his marginalia was in Chinese, in Mandarin. Good or bad? Excellent. Because he's basically translating ideas from one language to the other. It helps him understand things better as he moves from one language to the other. So it's possible that there are practices in learning communication that are not authorized, that are not orthodox in applied linguistics and TESOL, but might just be the best for us. Even a lot of other, so you know, this practice of moving between languages, shuttling between languages, violates Saussurian idea of autonomous languages. And you know, that's why we don't, we hesitate to use L1 in our classroom, right? L1 is bad, right? But a lot of people are moving in and out of the languages because they say, which is better? Something like juggling 3 languages like this, or just play with one language like this. Which is better cognitively? Which is better psychologically? The people who are dealing with multiple languages are developing a more complex proficiency of the languages, understanding of the languages. So I'm just saying this is just the beginning of thinking outside the box, beyond the norms, in order to find out what might work best for us. So I thank Asantha for starting this conversation. Remember, first book length treatment about language anxiety, especially in the post-colonial world. I think language anxiety in the classrooms in general, there are books. But to talk about the post-colonial experience of embarrassment of teaching English, using English among ourselves, it's a kind of a secret, it's kind of an open secret that we know about, but we are sometimes embarrassed to talk about it. But it's high time we brought it out into the open. Why do we feel embarrassed about speaking English with each other? How might we explain it? And how do we go beyond this in the sense of, why might it point to alternate pedagogies, alternate curriculums that might work better for us, either in a decolonial orientation or a Southern theory orientation that might present other possibilities. Thank you very much.